Benedict Spence is still with me. He's a Conservative commentator. This Gen Z thing, so I'll ask guest Jessica, as a Zoomer, Gen Z, and I don't even know what age that is. What is the mid-20s, something like that?
Yeah,
these
right.
Generation X, millennials, whatever. It's all a load of utter nonsense. I don't know why people can't just say people in their 20s or people in their 30s. I don't know why people had to come up with these things. But apparently they have, like, very different attitudes over the years. You know, like some younger people are very much turning against all the wokedom, for instance. Then you've got... I think I count as a boomer at 56, or maybe I'm a little bit young to be a boomer. I don't know what I am. I know what I think about everything, though. Before we get into what we're talking about in this hour, I know you want to come back to what Jessica had to say, because she was talking about how, you know, it doesn't, you know, if you work in an office, you end up doing other people's work once you've worked, if you've worked efficiently, and if you work from home, you can get the job done, then you can watch 2 hours of telly, like this survey says. I
mean, that is the sort of the attitude, isn't it? Is that we should all work at the very same, very slow pace, because if you try and get ahead, you'll end up picking up other people's stuff, which, to be fair, I do think is true, but that's, you know, that's a sign of, obviously, the office culture itself being very poor.
That tells you bad management.
It does tell you bad management, the fact that people can sit and watch television while still delivering on their deliverables, if you like.
Not our phrase, Jessica.
On time and getting it all done. To me, what this sounds like is an early form of universal basic income, because it sounds like you could do an awful lot of this stuff in a much shorter space of time. This is a way of just keeping people engaged, employed, of actually just saying to them, no, they are productive, but, you know, they're being paid for it, and I don't think they are.
Yeah, I'm all in favour of people being... But I'm not a clock watcher. I'm not some... Other than for my job, like, oh, it's 11 o'clock, you've got to go to the news.
I was going to say, you're always telling me the time.
I live by the second, and I miss most of the cues. I'm certainly... I don't like these people, you know, the whole, like, jacket on the back of the chair, oh, yeah, I'm pretending I'm in the office when I'm not. And presenteeism is a very, very big thing in the British and the American economies. It's not so in the rest of Europe. We all laugh at France and everyone taking a 3-hour lunch break, and they really, I mean, genuinely, they really do take a 3-hour lunch break. You know, if you talk about Germany, I mean, I worked in Germany, God, many years ago, in the early 90s, and it was extraordinary. At 5 o'clock, everyone, I mean, literally, everyone walked out. They just left. You think, what? You know, the shops were all closed by 5:30. You know, and they were, and their view was, if you work late, it's not because you're dedicated to your job, it's because you work inefficiently. Very German attitude. But I just think this idea that, well, you know, just do what you have to do to get by, get paid, moved on. That's not how life works. And you've read all the people. Mike Graham was on the phone with somebody when I came into the studio this morning, talking about, you know, people, you know, getting ahead and things. You know, most people I know who've done really well in life, they haven't been born with a silver spoon. They come from comprehensive schools like me, and they have worked their cojones off. And they have done every hour. They've done all the early shift and all the late shift and the double shifts, and they take a risk, and they've done well in life. And I know that a lot of people who work really hard who don't end up doing really well in life, but I think working hard pays off.
But again, actually, certainly in office environments, in some office environments, I think that that's not necessarily the case. I think that there are sort of...
And the managers are in on it.
And it's why I think, you know, I have some sympathy for Jessica, your previous guest, in that she's sort of been delivered into a system that actually I don't think does reward hard work in the way that it used to. I think, as she's sort of hinted at, it just invites more work onto you because nobody else is doing the work. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that therefore nobody actually tries very hard, because they suspect, rightly, that they'll just end up picking up other people's slack. And that's, you know, as you say, that's a problem of management.
Poor management.
And it comes, and as I say, it comes all the way from the very top, and I do mean government there, actually. If you don't set an example, and we go back to things like the civil service, and, you know, actually 14 years of the Tories not really delivering any deliverables, if that is the culture of your country, why should you be surprised that the young 20-somethings come into it and think, wow, this isn't worth my time?
That's why socialism always fails, by the way, also, because if you don't get rewarded for doing better, your family doesn't get rewarded, and working harder, everyone just works to the lower pace, and then you don't have not only you don't have a bigger pie to share out, you end up not having a pie to share out. It is absolutely fascinating.
And when the secret police stop doing their job as well, then the state just collapses.
Then the state just collapses, absolutely. So much to talk about, guys, so much to talk about. Look, the question I'm asking you today is completely different. If you want to get in touch on that, I really do want to hear from you, and I think a call has already come in on that. We'll get to that. But let's not get waylaid. Every poll is pretty much predicting a Labour landslide. The latest MRP poll for Salvation yesterday, quite a few are out this afternoon as well on the final day of campaigning. Well, final time before the election starts proper tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. This puts the Labour Party on 484 seats, the Tories on just 64 seats. We are talking about an absolute wipeout for the Tories and a huge supermajority, a Starmer-geddon or whatever it is that Boris Johnson has called it for the Labour Party. But as every poll predicts a Labour landslide, I'm wondering, what are your biggest hopes? What are your biggest fears for what a Labour government would do? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text on 87222 or get in touch on X at TalkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1 standard network rate message. Let's talk about that, Benedict, because in terms of the fears, Boris Johnson has been back on the campaign trail, having been on holiday for most of the campaign, made a surprise appearance at the Conservative rally in Chelsea last night. And Chelsea, it tells you everything, doesn't it? In central London. Not, by the way, at any point appearing alongside Rishi Sunak, which I think is rather telling. This is what Boris Johnson had to say.
They can achieve nothing at this election except to usher in the most left-wing Labour government since the war, with a huge majority, and we must not let it happen. Don't let the Putinistas deliver the Corbynistas. Don't let Putin's pet parrots give this entire country psittacosis, which is a disease you get, by the way, from cozying up to pet parrots. If you actually want higher taxes next week, this year, if you feel you've got a few thousand to spare, then vote Labour on Thursday.
Well, that's what he had to say. Benedict Spence, what do you make of his appearance and not his appearance, and what he had to say?
His appearance, he looked rather refreshed. His appearance, it was somewhat of a surprise to turn up this late in the campaign, or indeed at all. What he had to say is of no consequence. Nobody was really listening. I think people were just slightly surprised that he did bother to turn up. If you took this time to listen to what he was saying, you would have realised he wasn't really saying anything of any value. I think it would have actually been more beneficial to Rishi Sunak if they had appeared next to each other, and if they'd got into a punch-up and they'd actually settled their differences. Then if these people would have gone, my word, there's some backbone to these men.
Is Boris Johnson voting? It seems to me that people who are big Boris Johnson fans will already be voting Conservative.
Yeah.
And lots of people who are not Boris Johnson fans. The polling has been really clear that he wouldn't be a game changer for the Conservatives if he was leading the party.
Yeah.
Rishi Sunak backstabbing Boris Johnson as Boris Johnson and Nadine Dorries and everyone seemed to think, is not the reason why Boris Johnson had to leave government. He couldn't actually fill all the government ministerial jobs. Why not? Because so many people had deserted him over Partygate.
Yeah, people only sort of cling to this idea because he left. If he'd stayed, they'd still be in the position they are now. It would be dreadful, and nobody would be saying stick with Boris. They'd be saying get rid of Boris. We should have stabbed him in the back and put Rishi in place when we had the chance. That's the problem.
Or Liz, or I don't know how many others we've had in between.
I mean, honestly, Liz Truss. Anyway, it's one of those things where you can't get away from the fact that what has caused this is an inability to govern. Actually, Partygate might have been the thing that prompted the massive sort of nosedive. Yeah. But actually what has kept the polls low is because people have then turned around and gone, and hang on, whilst we're at it, why doesn't X, Y, Z thing work? Why is everything more expensive? Why are my taxes up? But Partygate, the government actually had a lot of goodwill during the pandemic at the start. It's surprisingly to many, people were prepared to go, do you know what, this is slightly unexpected, slightly unprecedented. We're prepared to give you a bit of time. Then they started to eke down when they realised, hang on, this isn't exactly what we were promised. This isn't being well run. And then the Partygate thing happened. And they didn't bounce back up because people said, now we're here, let's look at your record, because nothing is.
No, but also then people are very happy to have the free money handed out, and even though they're told that you're going to have to pay for it. You can't hand out that much free money and then not pay for it. You can't pay people to stay at home for best part of 2 years and then not have to pay the bills. And again, I'm sorry, I think voters are completely in cloud cuckoo land for not accepting that had to be paid for, as opposed to someone over there, some rich people over there paying for it.
I get that, but actually, if the Conservatives had been able to turn around and go, OK, yes, this is a huge bill that nobody expected to pay, and we sold it to you, and now you have to pay it back. Look at all the other things we've done. But the prisons are working, and there are at least the capacity,
police on the streets.
The NHS is getting back because the capacity is there. And as you say, if people could see that, then they'd be like, OK, I understand.
But they're not willing to give it. And then the cost of living crisis from the energy bills as well. You add all that. They've had some bad luck. I would also argue, though, of course, that Ukraine wouldn't have happened if the West had actually, it's not because of NATO and the EU, but if West had made it clear that Putin wouldn't get away with it, I don't think he would have invaded. That was the failure, rather than what I think Nigel Farage from Reform UK has analysed. We're looking at Boris Johnson talking about pregnant with horrors and all of that. Rishi Sunak is still talking about it's going to be all about tax rises. He's been campaigning in seats with just a 13,000 majority, which would be considered a safe seat in any other normal election, but they're obviously so worried about that. The Times newspaper analysis suggests that 130,000 voters in just 100 seats could decide the difference between a 200-seat Labour majority and a hung parliament, which is extraordinary. But it's always the case. There are not just bellwether seats that will look at that. And we're covering the election, obviously. And Benedict were with me from 10 till 1 on election night, not just election day morning, tomorrow. And there are some bellwether seats like, this is the seat that always changes hands when a government changes hands. This is a giveaway. But there are these key sections of key constituencies, even with all these boundary changes, which affects, difficult to compare with 2019 to 2024. But actually just a few voters in the centre ground changing their vote can make a massive difference. Same as in the American election, where it's actually just a few battleground seats, and it's a few neighbourhoods in those battleground seats, even though it's a country with a population of 300 million.
Yeah, as you say, ever thus has it been. In this election, I suspect it's not going to matter that much. I think that the Conservatives campaign to try to swing those people, persuade them over and say, look, don't give Sir Keir Starmer this huge majority, isn't going to work, simply because people do look at, the claims that, your taxes are going to go up, and they go, well, they've already gone up, they're already at record levels, and they'll have to go up even if we give you back your mandate. That's how it's going to happen. I think there are some interesting...
Do you think that's a given? Do you think everyone accepts that taxes are going to go up whoever you get?
Yeah. Actually, I think they do. And I think people will only begin to change their minds on that when they realise actually what that involves and how much poorer the country is in general. And it could still take a few years to get to that position. I don't think people realise that how much poorer this country is now just yet. But, there are a few other things that could still come into play here. The reform vote, you had a caller, Danny, earlier on, who was saying everybody he knows is going to vote reform. I still don't think that reform's vote has been properly priced into the polling yet, and how that might affect certain swing seats, because lots of people are saying they're not going to get many seats because it's too evenly spread.
Where they are second in a lot of seats, they are very, very, very far behind. They're not sort of 3 or 4 percentage points behind. Where, say, Labour, most of those seats. That means that they can get a very big vote. We don't know with polls, and again, people often could be shy about certain seats parties they support. We've seen that with shy Tories in the past as well. But that may not translate into a lot of seats.
Reform had done a lot of their own polling, which I didn't necessarily believe, but they were of the opinion that actually their vote has not been properly priced in yet. And I think
I'm still told they expect single figures MPs.
I think that was certainly the case, I think, now that they've had the recent spate of controversies. But actually, until then, even though nobody was saying it out loud, I think a few of them had drunk the Kool-Aid that they might actually get double figures. But we'll get, that's a separate question. There is also the other thing that nobody's talking about, although another caller did mention it, which is sectarian voting. That's going to specifically affect, I think, Labour seats, and that's independents. And there are quite a lot of those, actually, where people are looking and thinking that should be a safe Labour seat. There will be, I think, a couple of quite prominent Labour MPs who have quite a close-run thing on election night because of, and a lot of it is to do with Gaza, people motivated to vote against Labour because of a perception that Keir Starmer is not tough enough on this issue. Wait and see if that does, come about. But, that could be 2 or 3 seats. It could be, as we've seen previously, it could be quite a large number because, again, I don't think it's been properly priced in because it's unprecedented.
And it's very difficult to see. And again, we are seeing that fragmentation. Again, I personally think these things are good things. I think that people not, that whole sort of idea, you could put, a parrot up with a red rosette in some seats or a blue rosette in other seats, and it would win.
And then you'd get a disease, as
Boris Johnson talks about. He always has to bring in some random word no one's ever heard of, doesn't he? But this is the thing. I think it's good that people's votes. I've always been a floating voter. I've voted for many different parties, and I vote based on the policies, not some sort of tribal view. And what do you make of was Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, saying in an article in the Telegraph, basically, look, it's over, we failed, and we haven't got a leg to stand on when it comes to the criticisms of Reform UK, particularly over these claims, allegations of racism. Again, there's some claims of dirty tricks on behalf of Reform UK that think, people, candidates have deliberately stood as a candidate, not been vetted, and then defected to the Tories, or an actor, you've got someone who was clean actor, putting on his actor's voice, being filmed undercover by Channel 4. There'll be an investigation into that. We don't know whether Channel 4 were aware, but there's big question marks about that. But as Suella Braverman points out, we took money from Frank Hester. He's the donor, of course. You said they absolutely foul, undoubtedly 100% racist things about wanting to shoot Diane Abbott, for goodness sake.
I don't really see that that's entirely relevant, actually.
I think it's relevant. If you take 15 million quid from a bloke who's blatantly racist, you haven't got a leg to stand on.
This is so late in the campaign that I don't think it's relevant. I think there was a moment for Suella Braverman to be talking about these things, and I think
it's not relevant.
this is what I mean. Not that that wasn't a story, it was, but I think that she's doing this now because ultimately she still harbours ambitions of being Conservative Party leader. I think that she has perhaps woken up and realised it's probably not going to happen, largely because she opens her mouth rather a lot and says silly things. She's trying to sort of position herself as the yes, she does. She's not a very good politician. We can have a different conversation about that if you want. I am not a fan of her. There are better options if you want to have a right-wing Conservative Party leader than Suella Braverman. But she is trying to make one last appeal to those people within the party who want there to be a unity on the right. It's probably not going to happen. It's certainly not going to happen to her. But doing this, sort of softening the ground, if you like, also gives her a bit of leeway if she decides she would like to defect to Reform, which I think would probably be more beneficial for her career, because then she would be almost, the second biggest fish in that particular pond. She's a bigger character than Lee Anderson or Richard Tice or any of these people, by far. And I think actually that would be a very good way for her to keep her political career going, because I think whoever it is that does become Tory leader will suck the oxygen out of her career.
Yeah, I also, and of course we'll still have the issues like immigration is still one of the massive issues, and we don't see any real, there's no real plan to deal with it. I don't think Rwanda has a plan to deal with it, but from Labour. But detained migrants, 300 of them earmarked for Rwanda deportation, they've been released by the judges on the basis that Home Office officials are preparing to axe the scheme, because Labour have said that basically day one they're axing Rwanda. They said even if it was up and running and it was working, they would still axe it. I thought a bizarre thing to have said. It's not up and running. I don't think it will work even if it did go up and running. So these people are back on the streets. Now, again, will disappear. They will disappear. When this problem gets gets worse under Labour, which I think undoubtedly it will, because I don't think having a chat with Macron is going to resolve this. What happens then? You're still going to have the NHS in crisis. There's no doubt at all, but there's no money to fix the NHS in the short term. You're still going to have all the potholes in the road. Nothing is really going to change on that front.